I have two children. I've got Eva, who is 16, and George, who's now 14. From the age of 3 and 5, I lived with them on my own. Um, George was diagnosed when he was about 7 or 8 years old. Um, he he was very different to Eva. He was quite a difficult baby. Um, would have huge meltdowns from a very young age. Once he was diagnosed, I still found that he didn't necessarily tick all the boxes that you would find other people talking about all the time. So I went to various parent groups where they would talk about anything they needed to have help with in raising an autistic child. Um, and a lot of the time I would find that that didn't match up with my experience. Um, so with George, he has what is known as pathological demand avoidance, which is, I guess, he just displays different traits on the autistic spectrum. PDA isn't necessarily diagnosed. It's not necessarily recognized as well in some regions, but essentially George displays demand avoidant traits, which means if he's fine in himself, he'll display as, everyday regular child, absolutely fine. But when things aren't going right for George, he just can't cope. He can't cope with being told he has to do something. And that's very much his brain going into fight or flight mode and getting very defensive very quickly over what I might consider the smallest of things. But again, in not displaying typical traits, or what many would see as typical traits, he's very sociable, he's really outgoing, he's got an amazing personality, got loads of friends. He's never been the sort of child to take himself off on his own a lot, and therefore I've found it very difficult to gain understanding from people. Could be, in previous workplaces as well, that actually my experience with George is very different to what most people might consider an autistic child. And then COVID hit. So as much as it was a horrible time for many, many people, and I know a lot of autistic parents have said the same thing, actually, many children did thrive during that time. George was one of those children. He had me at home with him full time. I could do my job from home on my laptop, join meetings, and George was very much, happy in his environment. He had me nearby. He's not demanding when his needs are being met. So whilst he wasn't being schooled, which has always been quite a controversial subject, from a mental health perspective, he has just come on leaps and bounds, essentially. He's a different child now. And through COVID, he learned to ride a bike, which I never thought he would do. He, could go out the house into the street, the dangers of like too much traffic and, cars about and things just weren't there anymore. And life was just a bit quieter for him. My employers have been amazing. So there's no pressure at all, or issues if I do need to go to appointments, if I have anything pressing with George. It's the same for all of my colleagues, though, regardless of our situation. there's very much a, we know what your needs are and we trust you. And whilst, if I'm happy and I feel, trusted in my work environment, then I think you get much better results from that. So it's a very, lovely place to be, in all honesty. I have worked with a number of neurodivergent people in previous roles, and I have experienced firsthand the difficulties that they have had through not getting their needs met, especially when they vocalized what they need, and there very much seems to be blanket rules for staff members that don't necessarily work for everyone. And I think I've seen exactly the same thing with George, in that the school environment just hasn't worked for him. George can't sit exams because of his anxiety and hasn't been able to, but there's an expectation on all of our children to be able to conform to the system where they have to sit in a very alien place and actually answer questions on a subject that they know very, very well, but under this pressure you don't necessarily get the best performance out of them. It works for some, it doesn't work for everybody. And in the workplace, I think it's similar. Whilst an employer wants to set, a set of rules for people, actually, for me, it just makes complete sense that if you were to structure the environment towards the individual, you're going to get better results. It's kind of a no-brainer. And I know it's difficult, and, there's a lot of juggling going on in the workplace, but I think it's really important just to ask any people that you employ what their needs are, and if they can be met, then surely that individual is going to actually give much better results for that company. So it benefits all. Just to feel listened to, I think, is really important as well. And to some, people's needs can be tiny, but to others, these are really big things. People don't cope very well with change, for example. It's quite simple. If someone doesn't like a desk move, can't cope with a desk move, it really disrupts their feelings. They should be able to vocalize this or have it recorded firsthand, beforehand. How do you work better? Great, this is how I work better. Do you need structure? Do you like deadlines? Do you like doing presenting? How do you like your work presented on the screen? I don't cope very well when I've got a ream of information in front of me in a massive spreadsheet. I like to be able to condense it down, and I like visual, colour in what I'm seeing on the screen. Helps me to be able to dissect things better, and that's just my own preference. Knowing, a staff member with ADHD, and I've worked with a number of people who have been diagnosed with ADHD, the need for them to have regular breaks, for example. Why would you refuse somebody to have 5-10 minutes out of every hour, for example, if they're going to work better?